Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to talk about another Cosmere controversy, but today we're going to talk about Kaladin and Szeth, their arc in Wind and Truth. So yeah, this is going to contain full spoilers for the entirety of Wind and Truth and probably some more Cosmere stuff, but probably just Wind and Truth because I really just want to talk about like their character arcs. So yeah, with that being said, make sure you hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and if you're interested, you can check out the Patreon to get some early access and you can support the channel over there that way. So yeah, with that being said, let's begin. All right, so Wind and Truth. Ooh, the opinions about Wind and Truth are wild out there. There are a lot more negative opinions about the books or this book than I would have expected. Especially I guess this is where we start to really diverge between the plot readers and the character readers, because this is where Brandon makes his biggest like statement of being a plot writer more than a character writer, because it is a huge shift, I feel like, at this point in the Stormlight archives. And we are, kind of, I don't know, I think he's almost drawing the line in the sand to a degree. So it's kind of interesting. So I think one of the best examples of that kind of idea is kind of expressed in the Kaladin and Szeth arc in Wind and Truth. So the book is called Wind and Truth. So we learned that the Knights of Wind and Truth are Kaladin and Szeth. So that would make you think that they're a huge chunk of the book, which they are. They're kind of a spine of the book, but it's kind of similar to the way Brandon did words of Ra- words of Ra- no not words Rhythm of War, where it feels like part of the story is just like this secondary plot that's just kind of tucked over in the corner. Like all the battles and stuff and everything that wasn't dealing with the occupation in Rhythm of War very much felt just kind of separate. You know, it just felt completely separate to the story, like this little entirely self-contained story that was happening over there. So that's kind of exactly what happens in Wind and Truth. The Kaladin and Szeth storyline feels entirely disconnected from the rest of what's going on. It's directly related, obviously, but it's not related at all to any of the activities that's going on in the rest of the story. So it feels incredibly disconnected. So that in and of itself make the entire story feel unbalanced to me, which we're going to talk about in a different video, because I find it interesting that the entire series is like reflecting the balance issues that some of the individual books have. So yeah, we're going to talk about that later. But I find it really interesting that like this storyline is very much separated from the rest of the storyline of the book. And it's interesting because Brandon has set up this kind of thing where each book we have a flashback character. So they're more or less the main character of that book. So a lot of the time, like we get that character, like of course the first book is all about Kaladin and his flashback. So the majority of it is really about his arc and his, his interaction with the world and how all that relates. Same thing with Shallan's, and then same thing with Dalinar's. But we have something different when we hit Rhythm of War, though. We hit Rhythm of War, Venli was the flashback character, but Venli's entire arc in that book felt secondary. It felt completely sidelined to a degree. And her flashbacks didn't have a lot to do with either her character development or the entire story overall. So it felt very much like we weren't really focusing on the quote unquote focus character of that book. And the same thing happens here in Wind and Truth. So Szeth is that quote unquote focus character, and we get his flashbacks. But his flashback seems even minor than Vinley's flashbacks were in Rhythm of War. So like only thing that his flashbacks, at least in my opinion, like really gives us context of like the fact that he's basically been the way he is his entire life. Like it's not just a product of him being truthless and going through all that kind of indoctrination that makes him this very kind of rigid, kind of stoic, like rule follower the way he very much is, like always trying to seek to do like the one right thing, as if that's a concept, or as if that concept can be concrete really. So it's really interesting that like his past, like his flashbacks, inform on the character, but it doesn't really enhance the character for me in any way, shape, or form. Like he really very much still feels like the kind of plot device that he was in the beginning. He feels still very much like the assassin, and kind of the random nature of the way he just kind of switches sides and no one addresses it, no one questions it or anything like that. We get some comments and stuff, but nobody really outright questions like, how can he be like your bodyguard now when he just tried to kill you a few weeks ago, and like all this kind of stuff. Like it's never really addressed. So a lot of that kind of vague yada yada stuff that Brandon often does with Szeth and about stuff around Szeth, he kind of does that here. So a lot of the past about Szeth's upbringing and stuff, a lot of that to me feels very yada yada, because we get no real proper context for the Shin culture. Like, we have a little bit of context for most of the other cultures we visit on Roshar, but we have almost none for the Shin. And, like, the only lens we get through it in this story is very much from the religious aspect and from the way in which they do their honor blade type stuff and everything. And plus, they're already been, incredibly corrupted. So we just don't have any basis for a base level Shin culture. And we kind of try to do that with the flashbacks, but the flashbacks are so much about Szeth essentially being corrupted by what we all assumed was an unmade, but was actually Ishar. Like, so it doesn't really give us a proper baseline, in my opinion. Like, the idea of them living in the more rural area of Shinovar instead of, like, in the cities and stuff. I wish we would have gotten at least some context of what it's like in the cities. Just something so I feel like I understand how Szeth stands out in context of the rest of the Shin. Because to me, it feels very, very hollow. Like, a lot of the things about the Shin feel hollow. Shinovar as a country feels very hollow. Like, all of it just does not like come into play much at all. So Szeth being like the main art character and stuff in here, I think it's kind of difficult because the way Szeth as a character has been created thus far. Like, he is incredibly stoic and very, like, he barely has any internal dialogue essentially, because he doesn't do a lot of active thinking or not since he's become truthless does he do a lot of like introspection kind of pondering kind of thing and that kind of stuff. Like, he's just very much at this point where he's just accepted it. And like, since Words of Radiance, he's basically in the place where he kind of wants to die because he hates all the things that he's been forced to do, and he hates all the killing because he never wants to kill. That's one of the main things that we get from his flashbacks, is that from his culture he very much doesn't want to kill. Like, subtracting is terrible and stuff. So like, the idea of the killing and all this stuff is very much wearing on his soul in a very fundamental way. So it's understandable that he would get to the point where he's like, I just want it all to end and that kind of thing. So I kind of understand that to a degree, even though I don't, agree with that kind of idea of taking that way out and stuff. But that's also kind of the other thing that leads to the like other half of his arc. Like, the other half of his arc is supposed to be that he is essentially getting therapy from Kaladin. He's supposed to be getting, mental health help. And it's really interesting because like, Brandon introduced this idea very kind of like last minute, very much, 10 minutes ago. So the fact that Kaladin is able to help people in Rhythm of War with like this kind of group therapy stuff, like, it makes a lot of sense. Like, he's talking to people with symptoms similar to his and symptoms that he's seen before and stuff like that, and just kind of stuff that works for him, and just kind of doing this kind of simple kind of group therapy, kind of like finding their way. Like, the entire group of people is kind of finding their way together. But to then thrust him into this situation where like he's some certified therapist and he can just go help everybody, and Dalinar's like, hey, yeah, go help Szeth and go cure his mental issues, and then while you're at it, cure Ishar and help him all out and stuff too. Like, I think that as an idea is kind of terrible, because like, it's such an impossible ask. It's like, it's so terribly like unfair to ask that of somebody who essentially is just now inventing therapy and doesn't really understand how to use it or how it works and that kind of stuff. So it makes sense the way in which Brandon eventually kind of wrote those like attempts and stuff, because it feels very clumsy. It feels very haphazard. It feels like Kaladin has no idea what he's doing, because he doesn't. And then some of the stuff that he does try to do feels very basic, very like, textbook, very, very, to us it would seem very basic, generic kind of stuff. But like, it kind of makes sense that he would be trying to get to that place of what we would consider textbook, because he's inventing it. But also like, the idea that it would feel very generic and hollow is because he has no idea how to specifically help these people. So it kind of makes sense in that way. Like, I understand the idea of, the difficulty of writing this kind of skill set and this kind of, interaction, especially in this time frame that we have. Like, it's a horrendously short amount of time, and it's a incredibly difficult, labor and time intensive kind of thing that we're trying to do. So like, it's just going to hit this friction point where it's just not going to mesh, and that kind of happened, and I think it was unavoidable. But I do think the way Brandon kind of continued to write it in such a way where we get the idea that Kaladin doesn't really know what he's doing. He's very much fumbling and just kind of floundering around. So that works for me, but the fact that it does ultimately just work, the therapy just works for the characters, that part doesn't really work for me. Even though there's a magical aspect to it that I kind of can accept. Oh yeah, he also helps Nail. So Szeth, Nail, and Ishar. He just has like this miracle therapy thing happen. So like I don't like really how it played out, but I kind of understand from a writing standpoint where you're trying to construct this and like you kind of wrote yourself into a corner in a kind of way. So it kind of makes sense. And he also like has this acknowledgement that the work isn't done by way of saying like Kaladin's going to continue to help them when they're in their herald state and their mental mind palace place or whatever. He's going to like continue to help them and that kind of stuff, and by in turn I hope they continue to help him because he's not cured. Like he still needs help and all this stuff. And like what if he like has a terrible like relapse and stuff because he's now separated from everybody and everybody thinks he's dead, and like it's just all this other kind of stuff could like cause like all kinds of issues and stuff. So it's just a very complicated, messy kind of thing that we're kind of dealing with in this situation. So I don't think it's going to be done in a very coherent, like make everybody happy kind of way. So it's just not really doable. But let's talk about Kaladin's arc in general. So Kaladin, by virtue of being like, I mean, Brandon kind of tries to say like he doesn't really have any main character, especially in Stormlight, but like it's very clear Kaladin is like the main character. He is John Stormlight. He is that guy, like. So it's hard to get to a point at book 5 where you're at the end of this huge arc where you don't give him a lot of, page space. Like he needs to be one of the main characters because he is one of the main 3. And so, and he is, the one that the series started with, like book 1 started with him. So book 5 kind of, has to at least give him some flowers, I guess. So like we kind of hit this point where Kaladin ends up kind of overtaking some of Szeth's arc. So there's some points in which where if Brendan was more of a character writer, I think he would have like given some of these moments more to Szeth because it is Szeth's book. So it kind of makes sense that Szeth would get more of the character interaction stuff. But because and when I say that I mean more helping like Nail and Ishar through their kind of depression states and stuff. Because for one, Szeth has a greater connection to Nail, so it would make more sense for him to have a more active, hands-on kind of ability to help Nail. But it kind of makes sense that he doesn't because he himself is not in a state in which he can really help people. And so the therapy itself is still is still trying to he's still trying to work his way through how his brain works and that kind of stuff. So it makes sense that he wouldn't. But from like a character connection standpoint stuff, it makes sense that you would give something like that to Szeth. So to a degree, to have Kaladin do it when Kaladin has no connection to Nail and stuff like that, it feels like you're taking something away from Szeth. But on like a meta contextual level, it's the only real way to do it, and it's kind of consistent with the characters because Szeth wouldn't do that. Like even the connection that we've seen that he has with Nail is not that kind of connection that he would kind of go in that direction. So it doesn't really it wouldn't match. It doesn't match up. And then the idea that Brandon clearly had that he wanted to tie the nature of their madness and like their all that stuff back to like the core of who they are, and what they did. So the idea that this flute song that Kaladin has been learning to play has been playing badly and stuff because the flute that Wit gave him, the song The Wander Cell and stuff that he learned, was actually the rhythms that they followed all the way to Roshar. So that is more or less a coincidence in my mind, and it just happens to be one of those things that connects Nail back to the original basis of his mission, like his original core self of who he is. So to hear that song and then for the wind to help Kaladin to play it better, to actually, just kind of be the background and play it better than he's playing it, because of course the wind can, hold all those sounds and stuff within the wind, because that's kind of a cool idea. Like it kind of makes sense that that would kind of help to recenter him in a way, because like the wind is more or less a spren, which is spiritual, and then that song has a very hard spiritual connection to them. So it kind of will work in the same way as like speaking another ideal for him in a lot of ways. So it kind of makes sense that it works, but it's one of those things that is like, this is a skill that Kaladin has never had or showed proficiency for, and like he clearly doesn't have skill with it because it said over and over that he plays badly. So it's just I think it's one of those things that's kind of unavoidable. Like it's the idea that you're trying to help these people in a situation that's like therapy. Like you're trying to get something satisfying out of it, but that's going to be near impossible because these processes take so much time. Like you can't just kind of get to a satisfying point. But when you're writing, you need to be able to give something satisfying. You need to pay it off. So you're kind of, you're kind of stuck. You're kind of you gotta kind of, you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't, essentially. So by giving him a way to basically break through to these characters, because we need to break through to these characters at least a little bit, he made the connection to their basic connection as to what they did, why they did it. So I understand why some people wouldn't like that, but I understand it from the perspective of why Brandon had to do it that way. But I can't really think of a lot of other ways that I would have personally enjoyed it more, because again, I am a plot reader, not so much a character reader. Like I can understand character arcs and stuff and see how they would be improved in various ways and whatnot. But me personally, my enjoyment comes from the greater big plot, the big wide scope of everything, like that kind of stuff. I love that stuff. So those are kind of the main points of their arc that I kind of want to talk about. The idea that Kaladin more or less is taking away some of the story arc from Szeth, but it kind of makes sense that that would happen because Szeth is not that big or impactful of a character in the way his natural agency would allow that to happen. He wouldn't really do that because all the agency we've seen him have throughout the entire series is because someone's telling him to do it. Granted, it could be a good character arc for us to see him get to the point where he can make his own decisions and stuff, but I just don't think I think that's why he's a back half character also. I think that's why Szeth will come back in the back half, because his character arc is going to be too wide to just do in this part of this book. So it kind of, you kind of got to push it back to the end. There's a lot of stuff like that I think Brandon did that he just kind of wraps up in a way that he's like, okay, we just kind of need to finish this for this arc and we'll come back to it and further flesh it out and finish fleshing it out in the back half and stuff, because this book is already a tome. But a bunch of other little things that kind of happen in there. Again, I already said I think Szeth is a fairly hollow character. Like I didn't really care about any of his flashbacks. I didn't care about his even the Molly thing, like his little sheep and stuff. Like I was like, yeah, it's sad that they killed it, but like I didn't feel like any connection to that creature at all. I didn't understand his bond to the character. Like it was one mention that he had, would hang out with the sheep and stuff and like tell it, I think, secrets or something, like, basically it was his best friend or whatever. Like it was basically explained in the course of one sentence. So I never felt the connection to it and stuff. When they killed it and then that whole thing of him finding the thing in the house and stuff, I thought that was very much a Kaladin finding the horse kind of a thing. So it had that kind of effect, but I felt no real connection to it. So a lot of Szeth stuff in this book I felt no real connection to. And a lot of Kaladin stuff is just the direction I didn't expect his arc to really go in. And it just feels like a I don't know, it just feels like I don't know, it's kind of unsatisfying. It feels complete and it feels logical, but it feels unsatisfying. But I am satisfied with the idea that him and Syl will probably end up together in some way, shape, or form now, because that part was done well. But I think, honestly, the Wind and Truth part of Nights and Wind and Truth could have been done a lot better. So, yeah, continue with me as I continue to make these videos, these supplemental videos, where I basically process my thoughts on Wind and Truth. And now we're into the new year, so we're going to do this for the first little bit of the year. Then we're going to jump into some other readings and stuff like that, and probably even just some other random stuff, just like movie stuff and all that kind of stuff. I don't know if anybody's interested in watching it on the channel, but we'll see. So, yeah, with that being said, make sure you hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. And if you're interested in supporting the channel in another way, you can check out the Patreon. Link is in the description. So with that being said, I will talk to y'all next time. Peace.